Joining us today is Ben Weiss, a marketing executive we've known for many, many years. He knows a lot of different avenues within marketing, which we'll get to. But right now, what we wanted to do is just to have a few questions to get to know a little bit more about Ben the person. So, thank you for joining us today. Well, hopefully,
Well,
this is helpful for you.
well,
Um,
thanks, Paul and Tower. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. What moment in your career has taught you the most?
This is an interesting one because my career spans 18 years all in technology marketing, from large corporations such as IBM and Salesforce to startups to the agency world. And when I reflected back on this, there was a moment in my time in the agency space that sort of really had the most learning to it. I had a very large technology client, sold laptops, among other things, and we were gearing up for a big email promotion that they were working on to send, and seasoned solution architect working on it for me as part of that campaign. And next thing you know, the campaign drops and I'm getting a call from my client saying, "What happened here?" I said, "Why? It deployed." I said, "No, some people got it who shouldn't have." Long
Oh,
story short, the suppression list was not included
Oof.
on that email that went sent, which was not good because, of course, you have competitors and things like that. So at the time, this was the largest revenue client to the organization and something multi-million dollars of business. So I had to quickly ascertain what happened, why it happened, calm the client down, find a way to make them happy again, and protect my team all at the same time. And none of them were ones who directly reported to me. They were people resources who I managed, but I wasn't their first line manager. So it was an effort, and all at the same time trying to get my senior leadership on board with what the problem was, what my solution was, without losing too much money for the organization. So when you're sitting there, you realize that your client's job is at risk because he's really catching a lot of heat for it. And you sit down, you quickly ascertain the problem, you understand what it is, protecting your people at the same time, because this was at a time in 2015 or so, remote work wasn't really vogue, but my architect was working out of a coffee shop in Baltimore, Maryland, because he was not near the headquarters. So the relationship was strong, but it also was not something I could walk over and say, "Hey, what happened here?
Mhm.
And, what do you need? What can I do to help?" So it was a lot of phone calls back and forth before Zoom was really as big as it was. And you're trying to understand and figure out the problems there. But it was really one of those things where you have to put your own ego aside. It's a who, what, when, where, why, and how kind of scenario. It's understand the problem, bring a proposal to everyone to fix it. And in the end, we did manage to save the job of my contact at the client. So he was happy. I got a Christmas card from a client for the first time that Christmas, which was actually kind of a nice thing to see. So they were happy. We implemented a process to prevent that from happening again, which got to be kind of annoying for them because before every email we had to deploy for a while, we had a quick 15-minute call and went through everything, make sure suppression lists were there, things of that nature. And my team was happy. And the architect was protected. As a leader, you're going to throw yourself in the sword, whether it was your problem or not, to protect people there. And you're able to find ways to keep management happy and keep the client there and have their business even grow further. So it was a lot for someone who didn't really know at that time of the morning what that day was going to be. And when you have to sit there and figure all those things out quickly on the fly and hope that you're making the right decision with confidence was probably the biggest learning experience in my career.
I have to say, it also says a lot about your character that you found it important to protect your team. There's so many people today that just look out to
Yeah.
protect themselves. I mean, I know this about you, but to
Yeah.
me, I think is something that really does speak
Well,
volumes
speaks
about the
volumes.
character of the
well,
person.
I appreciate that, but it was a unique situation because, as I said, none of the people who were working in the account were my direct reports.
Mhm.
So I'm sitting there on a weekly basis fighting for the most highly skilled architects and developers that I know what we are at the organization that understand all of our clients' rules and how things have to be from a branding perspective. And the last thing I needed was someone on the largest client for the organization to not be at the top of their game. And it's one of those things that it's not just necessarily protecting them, it's protecting their existence and my existence at the organization as well.
Mhm.
Because as I learned years later, the agency world is exciting, but if you're not the owner of said agency, as clients go away, jobs go away.
Mhm.
It was a much more bigger thing than just saying, oh, I've got to save myself. It's like there are many people whose jobs were potentially at stake if they walked out of the door because of that one error.
That leads us to the next question. When your colleagues or team members describe you, Ben, what are 3 words they consistently use?
Well, this one's kind of a nice segue is loyal. It certainly comes up a lot, sometimes to a fault, actually, which is something that is a hard lesson to learn as you go through that. Hardworking, especially in the times of, now where there is no real end to the day. I never thought I would ever admit it, but during the pandemic, I missed my commute.
Mhm.
You know, used to have 45 minutes to decompress after work, and then it became like 45 seconds and your kids are there. And I think the third is probably passionate, and that carries both inside of work and outside of work with some of the ways that our paths crossed earlier on in our careers. So
Mhm.
I think those 3 come up a lot.
That's great. And a perfect segue again, talking about our paths crossing. Outside of professional achievements, what passion project or personal interest has taught you skills that make you better at what you do?
Well, I think you could see over the shoulder, there's some of the medals from the running, which ties into, it wasn't directly how Tara and I crossed paths, but via the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation earlier, after my Crohn's diagnosis came in college, stabilized myself over time. And it was finally like, how can I give back to the organization that was there? And it was in 2010 when I ran my first half marathon. And it's been 15 years. I just kicked off training for my 14th race for the foundation yesterday. It'll be my 5th full marathon, which will be in Berlin in September.
Oh.
In There's a lot of things that sort of come through that experience with running 9 halves and soon 5 full marathons. There's discipline. There's relying on a team, especially when it was in the beginning. The program changed drastically during the pandemic, where it went from a lot of large groups to, as a lot of nonprofits did, they got hit badly during that and things weren't the same. Marathon training is a very lonely experience. Unless you're doing it with other people, you're running long miles by yourself. There's obviously the fundraising component too, which takes its own piece into it. And it really taught myself that I could really do some hard things that I didn't think I could ever really do before. And there's not much professionally, I don't think, aside from maybe that first story, which happened sort of pre-marathon distance, that I probably can't handle if I really think about it, if I could run 26.2 miles multiple times and choose to do that and pay to do that. Secondarily, it's the other way in which our paths cross, Paul, with the old time baseball game, which I can't believe it's been multiple decades working on that, to be completely honest. And, for those who don't have any idea, it's a charity baseball game that's put on by a small group of volunteers that started in 1994 when the baseball strike hit. And people just wanted their own baseball game and they raised funds for organizations. And, the game itself has existed for over 30 years. I've been involved for most of it, not all of it. I think the last number I heard was somewhere close to $1.5 million to $2 million raised over the years from multiple organizations. And the fundraising, yeah, it's a big part of it, but it's learning how to do a lot with little. We have a very small operating budget by design because everything goes to the organizations.
Exactly.
People like, yourself do a lot with donating time and services and things like that for the good of things, but you have to really get creative with little things, and you have to find ways of doing things that may not be the most technologically advanced, but you still sort of get the job done. So
Mhm.
those are 2 things that sort of still really, they're sort of lifetime contracts. They're never going away. So wherever I end up next step in my career, those are certainly a part of it.
Mhm.
And they always will be because they help me become who I am.
I think you're right. And the new vogue phrase is bootstrapping. So, you're
Yes.
very good at bootstrapping for Steve
Ahead of
Buckley's
our
all-time
time with
baseball.
that before the
Exactly.
term was coined.
It was just what we did then before it had a
Yeah,
name.
no, it certainly is what we did then. Yeah,
We didn't know else.
no,
But
we didn't. We're sort of just said, oh, we had an idea. We knew we could find a way to do it, and you just sort of
right.
got it done.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
it says a lot when you have people like that as part of your team and your organization to sit there who you just know they can just execute and get things done. They don't necessarily need to be told exactly what it is. It's like, I have an idea, but what do you think?
Mhm.
We have to get from point A to point B. How are you going to get there in X amount of time with X amount of dollars and whatever it might be? And this is the result that we need to have,
Mhm.
especially when you're talking philanthropic stuff. You're not saying that, oh, we'd like to have X number of clicks and opens. No, we need to raise X amount of dollars. This
Mhm.
is what it is. It's not anything where there is a ideal scenario. It is the
Right.
required scenario. And I think
Mhm.
that brings a whole other level of discipline to what you're,
It does.
because other people are relying on you in that sense.
Mhm.
So, in order to be able to do all of this stuff, you would have had to have had some sort of mentor in your
Yeah.
either personal or professional life. So, can you give us a little insight onto a particular mentor?
Yeah. I think there's there's one on the personal side and there's a pair of people who are tied together on the professional side. Personally, it's my paternal grandfather. He was someone, I was the oldest grandchild in that side of the family. He had a very special and unique relationship. Even though he's been gone for 15 years, there's a lot that I still draw from daily. A lot of the biggest thing that I learned from him was his work ethic. And he fought World War II for the army, was one of 4 Jews in his outfit over in Germany, liberating concentration camps and things like that. So what he had to see as a 20 something is something that even before he passed, he never fully explained for reasons I understand. But he sat there, he served his country, he came back, went to school for 1 semester. This isn't for me. Started his own business with his brother. They sold furniture in Connecticut and he worked 6 days a week. And he did that up until he was, probably in his 70s when his doctors told him he had to stop. But he was also progressive in his ideas. He had a lot of customers at the time who were considered, lower income. And he was offering credit before it was a thing that was happening, before credit cards really were there. He would say, oh, I'll cash your check. You just pay me my portion first, and then I'll cash your check with no fees. So he did a lot of things to bootstrap his business, to use that term. He did it in working, and just the focus, the work ethic was a big piece, but he had a massive focus on family as well. And even though he worked 6 days a week, whenever we'd go visit, you would certainly know that you're going to see him out or you'll see him in the office at home, but he made sure that he spent plenty of quality time with his family at the same time. And find that balance is something that everyone strives to find today, but actually seeing it in action at a young age really underscored the importance of that. So that's on the personal side. Professionally, I made the shift from the nonprofit sector to corporate marketing back in 2006. And I know Tara's got familiarity with it. That's not an easy change to make. And, through the American Marketing Association, I hooked on with a mentor at the time. We worked together for a few months and he passed this job opportunity to me that was at this small agency called the Acacia Marketing Group, which was one of the first corporate marketing experiences I had. And the 2 women who were co-owners of that company were absolutely incredible. They both worked for Lotus years ago, and then Lotus was sold to IBM, and they had moved up the corporate ladder, but they weren't actually doing the work that they enjoyed doing. So they started their own company back in the summer of 2001, months before 9/11 hit. And I ended up crossing their paths in 2006. They had a really large technology client in Cognos, and they needed more people to help work. So I'm sitting there in a suit interviewing with one of the co-owners in a Starbucks of all places, just sort of how it was. They brought me on as a contractor in the beginning, and then I became the 3rd full-time employee. And they had a lot of other women who worked for them who were people whose paths they crossed before, but they wanted sort of mother's hours. They had younger kids. So I was there. Anything, when you have the chance to sit there and work directly with the founders of an organization, and you're sitting there and you're on calls with them on a regular basis, I'd speak to each of the two women, Marianne Fitzpatrick and Teresa Garrett, regularly during my almost 4 years there, sometimes multiple times in a day. And they both had their strengths, and they both were able to, they allowed me to be a sponge and soak in as much as I possibly could, from event execution to marketing strategy to budgeting to learning how to run a small business. I mean, it was really all there. One of the things that was really interesting, that was another lesson sort of at the end, was when to also let your employees go into sort of Cognos was acquired by IBM. And I was like, oh, I've got this chance here. Maybe I need to go ahead, as I looked to build my own family at the time, and try and build, a larger career. And after some conversations with the folks there, the same people from Cognos that I was working for who were now IBMers, second opportunity came across. They offered it to me. They actually spoke with Marianne first to make sure that everything was okay, that they knew it was happening. And it was almost like a 4-year boot camp in a sense, really what it was, but it was very much hands-on. They let me do most of the traveling during that. And they just, there's moments when you realize, geez, could I have found other ways of offsetting things compensation wise? And could I have really been almost a part owner of that agency at this point now, years later? You sit back and you look at it, and, Marianne's recently passed all too young due to an illness, and was unfortunate, but I'm not where I am today if it's not for her and Teresa and the kindness and the openness that they showed to someone who finished his MBA, thought he knew what he was talking about, and was suddenly going to sit there and throw myself into the corporate marketing world. So yeah, the personal and professional mentors, I couldn't narrow it down to just one, but those three in particular sort of all had significant impacts.
Those are outstanding examples of people and how they can help inspire and make a difference for others. So love it. What book or podcast has influenced you?
I think it's reading sometimes is not necessarily as available with 13 and 10-year-old daughters at the moment. I love the chuckle, but there's a few things as I went back and I looked, like what have I really enjoyed over time? A podcast I try to always listen to now is Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett. He always has these incredible interviews, and to hear some of the people sit there and really not just share their stories, but their knowledge in some of that time is really things I've learned just from those conversations, and being able to sit there and say, okay, is this something to take with a grain of salt, or is this actually like legitimate advice that I can take and listen? But as I go back, I find myself going back to storytellers, and it should be no surprise as a marketer. So one book that I loved and I still go back to, it may age me a little bit, but it's Inside by James Lipton, the host of Inside the Actor Studio.
Mm-hmm.
And all the different stories in there, and hearing everything from there and everyone's journey. But I look at great writing. I look at Aaron Sorkin and anything he's done with The West Wing and Sports Night and things like that. I probably quote Ted Lasso too much around my household, and I get the strange looks because not everyone has seen it. And I was always a big fan of Seinfeld and just the magistry that they were able to do from a storytelling perspective. And when you have intelligent writing and storytelling like that, it's kind of odd for a marketer not to think that that's interesting. So those are the things that I certainly sit there, and I'll probably go back, and I think I'll probably about time to sit down with my 13-year-old and start watching Ted Lasso with her, so she's not totally confused, and see things there. But I constantly go back to those three. It's just the sharpness in writing. It's like I could sit there and watch those over and over again, because you're going to pick up something and learn something new every time.
So just remember to add a little newsroom in there for her too. You always leave that out.
Yes,
And
no, but that's why I mentioned Sorkin himself.
Particularly in today's day and age of media.
Newsroom was fantastic, and even though Sports Night was short-lived, it was another one of those well-written shows. But actually, I picked up one book I hope to get to now. It was from people who worked in the West Wing. What's Next? So
really?
I've got to go back. Yeah, it's significantly large. I probably need a bit of a vacation to sort of,
Yep.
but it looked really cool. And it's a backstage pass to the West Wing with cast, crew, and everything else. So it sounds really interesting. Another storytelling one, no shock. We'll see how long it takes me to get through that.
Okay. All right. Then, if you could spend a day learning anything from anyone, alive or not, who would that be?
This is probably the hardest question for me to sort of go through because there's so many cliche answers to this question that anyone could sort of give. But there's two things that stand out. One, if I could sit down a day with Gary Vaynerchuk and just be able to say, okay, how does he go through and see the future for what it is? Because if you go back and watch his stuff from 2008 and 2015, he was talking about things that have happened or are already happening. How does he also not care what people think when he's crazy? Get past the whole imposter syndrome thing and just be like, how do you have that consistency of that attitude there? Secondarily, and a little bit more surprising, maybe not, two past war leaders in both Winston Churchill and Theodore Roosevelt, actually. Going back to my initial story was the ability to learn how to make quick decisions, assess things quickly with confidence, and know that you're doing the right way. Being able to be a fly on the wall and witness things like that. I was in London years ago and I was able to tour Churchill's old bunker. Is now a museum down there, which is just fascinating. And to be able to sit there with some of the brightest minds in military strategy would really be something else to try to just soak anything up at that point.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really interesting answer, especially when you think about, you were talking about imposter syndrome, but
Yeah.
how much of their self-doubt did it creep in, and did they second guess themselves, or were they worrying about that? Was this the right decision or not?
And how did they not show it in the outside?
Yeah.
We always talk about being a duck, right? Where you're letting it all roll off your shoulders and your feet are going 95 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
How in like the highest of high pressure situations were they able to maintain that? And is that something that's just innate in themselves, or is that something that people can learn to do themselves later?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So now we've talked a lot about the past. What do you see as the future of marketing?
Go back to another favorite movie. I think of what Ferris Bueller said. Life
Go
moves pretty
home?
fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you might miss it. And I think that's one of the bigger things that anyone in marketing has said. If you don't stop for a second and realize what's happening, it's going to go right by you and you're not even going to be able to be caught up. So you have to almost run parallel paths, try to keep up with the way things are today. And now everything is with how people are leveraging AI to try and help with things, whether it be using something like a Chat GPT, or if there are other AI tools to help with ad creation and whatever it may be. But it's also trying to sort of keep one eye on, well, where are things going? What's next? I mean, I think anyone probably could have thought years ago, gee, why is everything a subscription now? And then next thing you know, everything's a subscription and no one owns anything. So how can you keep up with what's going on now, but also try and keep that eye out for what's next? Because it seems like it's not slowing down anytime soon.
I'd say that's a very good point, and you're right. It is not slowing down anytime soon. And it's interesting for our business. What Tara and I have been seeing with a lot of companies is that so many times they look at that next big thing and think, okay, well, that's the shiny new toy we need to make sure we're implementing.
Yeah.
But slow down. Why? What is it you're trying to solve with it? And you're just hitting on that point exactly.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, after you mentioned that, Paul, is, and it's such a cliche thing that people do talk about a lot, is the idea of sales and marketing alignments and where all that comes through. And after going through several iterations of that in different organizations, especially with the new shiny rocks that are coming up, if you're not aligned in your overall goals and that's not fitting into it, then don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like just because it's a shiny rock doesn't mean it's something that everyone has to do. Because you get trapped in this thing that if you start doing what everyone else is doing, then you're not differentiating yourself. You're just doing what every other organization that you're competing against is doing. And maybe not doing it is going to get you somewhere faster. If it's going to not doing it's going to help support your goals even more. Sales is one way, and marketing is the other. Then you could add any kind of shiny rock you want. You're not going to be able to help each other the way you need to. So,
Completely true.
yeah.
I'm going to call an audible.
Okay.
So as the person who is bootstrapping the marketing department for MTMG, I would love to know like what your best tip is for a small marketer. Because I know you're talking a lot about your big marketing experience, but if you could like, shine a little light for us little peons here.
Well, I wouldn't use that as the word, but I would hope that you're aligned with your sales department, Tara. That's the first thing.
It depends. Some days, not so much.
I would hope that you understand. I think the biggest thing is trying to do too much at once.
Okay.
If you can, because you go back to the whole concept of being a jack of all trades, master of none, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people will say, oh, well, you have to do, a podcast. You have to do email marketing. You have to do advertising. Well, no, if you're a team of one, what can you do that you're going to get comfortable in that? And have you tested it to see if it's working?
Mm-hmm.
It's, A/B test things as much as you can, but don't try to A/B test 5 things at once. Pick one thing and see what happens, because you've got 2 hands, a certain number of hours in the day. And even if you have interns or whatnot, you're not going to be able to sit there and try and be everything to, your sales team over there. But
Right.
I would just really start small, pick one thing and go with it, because your journey is not going to be the same as IBM or Salesforce or even Cato Networks, where I was the previous 14 months or so. Those are all organizations of vastly bigger sizes.
Right.
So find something that you think is going to work, try it, and then if it doesn't, you move on to the next. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to turn to revenue, but it may keep you sane.
No, yeah.
Well, that's it. That's an important part.
Well, what's the important part, Paul? The revenue or the sanity?
Ooh, sanity. Because we live together, so I kind of need that.
Yeah, I could imagine that probably is an important piece of it. I mean, everyone wants, the revenue to be there, but I mean, you have to have confidence in what you're doing. The only way you're going to do that is if you really spend time on it, test it appropriately, and know you've given it a good faith effort to see if it's going to do anything or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds simple, but
no, it's not. It's not.
That is
but
very
thank
true.
you.
You're welcome. I appreciate that wasn't such a total left field audible. I was kind of scared when you called that for a second. I'm like, wait a second.
I wasn't ready for that one.
Who gave her that power? Not me.
That wasn't on the prep list.
Although knowing Tara as long as you should have known that was coming.
I knew something was. I didn't know what.
I'm just going to keep it real for you.
I totally appreciate that.
So, Ben, thank you so much for joining. I think this was really great. It shows a lot about not just your character, but your intelligence and your work ethic. Thanks. And I think anybody that sees it is going to know exactly why we really wanted to have you on here. So thanks so much.
Appreciate that. It was almost cathartic exercise in a sense, and reinforcing some of those things. Because as you go through your process, you're just like, oh, well, what is going on here now? And going back and looking back at all those things was really a good thing to go through. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful.
That's so good to hear, because we don't really know. We haven't done the A/B testing on this yet. We just couldn't sit still anymore and watch everyone struggling for work. So I'm really happy to hear that. Thank you.
You're welcome.